Brought to you by BedroomBattlefields.com. This is the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. Alright, Stuart, welcome to the podcast. So we've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to ask you about Great Escape games. We're going to talk about getting your army in White Dwarf back in the day. We're going to talk about winning the World Championship at Warhammer in '99, managing a Games Workshop store. We've got all that to come. Loads of good stuff. So are you excited?
I've got to search my memory quite intensively, it sounds like.
We've got the wires plugged into your brain to pull it out. So, but no, it's always nice to start these conversations with the old origin story. So tell me a bit about, tell us about encountering the hobby for the first time.
Well, it was, I grew up in Canada, and I think I was about 12 years old, and I can't remember the name of the local hobby store. Well, I say it's local. It was about 40 miles away. It was in a city called St. Catharines. And I happened to be in there. It was an early evening. And I saw these fellows playing a Napoleonic war game. They were using one of the box game rule sets, Napoleon's Battles, I think it's called, like an Avalon Hill game, that sort of thing. But they were used to playing it with miniatures. And I think my nostalgia paints a rather more luscious picture of the gaming table and the painted miniatures. I think maybe now if I looked at those same painted miniatures and that gaming table that I saw as a 12-year-old, I probably wouldn't be quite as impressed now. But I was impressed enough as a 12-year-old with the ranks of painted soldiers and the idea of commanding, having this sort of tabletop gaming experience, which I was aware of but hadn't been involved in. It just captured me, the visual aspect of it. And the kind of, it was we all know what it's like as hobbyists. It's the researching and painting and putting together our forces is 90% of our hobby time. The gaming side of it's a small fraction of hobby time for most of us. Yet as a 12-year-old, I was really enchanted by the sort of dedication this would require, and the kind of spectacle that you can get. There's nothing like painted toy soldiers on a model-scape, on a table-scape. There's nothing quite like it. Nothing quite comes up to it. I've tried computer games before. I've tried computer games where you have this sort of gaming, and it just doesn't work for me. And it's not that I'm a particularly visual person. I don't think I am. But I just think I love the way it's totally absorbing. You can't put wargaming down and pick it up again, really, if we're honest. I think I've been a wargamer now since probably about the age of 12. And despite having the occasional tiny break from it, and maybe putting it on the back burner for a while, it never really leaves you. And when you're in wargaming, when you're full in wargaming, it's I think I'd even say it's definitive. You might say, my name is so and so. I'm a wargamer. It defines who you are to a degree because of the amount of dedication it involves. I think from there, I quickly found fantasy wargaming because I was a young teenager and we were into role playing games, and we were into miniatures, but wargaming wasn't something we'd experienced yet in those early teenage years. And because we were all playing fantasy role-playing games naturally, whereas my inclination is historical wargaming, naturally, fantasy wargaming's so much more popular and so much more accessible, especially at that time. Even at that time, I was at the dawn of fantasy wargaming. I think I can't remember which came first, Warhammer or Chainmail. Chainmail, I think, is early 80s. I think Warhammer's around the same. I don't know which came first, but for me, Chainmail came first. And so we would play on living room floors, and we'd set out whole villages and very expansive battlefields to play Chainmail. And those were great. Those were great introductions to wargaming and to this sort of hobby, and it's something I've always reached back for. And I remember one time at Games Workshop, I was at Games Workshop for about 9 years. I joined as a store manager, and I ended up being in the trade sales team. I was a senior manager in the trade sales team. And I recall along the way when I was a manager that Games Workshop held this event that was just for Games Workshop staff up at the head office in the gaming hall. It was called Little Wars, and it was just Games Workshop staff putting on non-Games Workshop miniature games. There wasn't a Games Workshop game there. The hall was full of games, most of them historical. And I really fondly remember that weekend because, see, I was initiated by then. And by the time I was at Games Workshop for a couple of years and obviously I was playing the Games Workshop games, but very quickly my eye found War Games Foundry and other companies that were making historical miniatures. And I very quickly went that way, whilst maintaining the interest in the Games Workshop side of things. But when I went to Little Wars and saw so many historical games, I played Warhammer Ancient Battles with the Perrys at that event. I played with, I can't remember his name. It may come to me. With another sculptor, I played a Vietnam game. We played a Vietnam game using home-brewed rules. I played a load of historical games, and it really set my trajectory for wargaming. So all of my wargaming from then, really, I was only interested in historical gaming. And it's ironic. It's kind of ironic that it was partway through my Games Workshop 9-year Games Workshop career that it was a Games Workshop event that totally took me away from fantasy wargaming into historical wargaming. So that really, I mean, that kind of, I think that's kind of an overview of how my wargaming career. Do we have wargaming careers? Sort of, don't we? That's how my wargaming careers developed, and I think since I got that historical, that massive dose of historical wargaming virus from that Little Wars event, it just propelled me, and I just thought, Imperial Guard's not for me anymore. Tomb Kings ain't for me anymore. It's really, I was full in on Greek hoplites and British paratroopers.
Mm. But I want to jump back a wee bit to the period between you being sort of 12 and, having a career in the industry. But just on the Little Wars thing, I had no idea about that. So was that, did they run that every year, or was this a one-off?
I think it was a one-off. They may have done it again or may not. Certainly it was not a regular thing. It was very, very rare. I think it was possibly a one-off.
Why do you think they did it? Just the staff wanted it?
I know why they did it. They did it because when you first discovered wargaming, you were presented with a vista that you'd never seen before. If you try to grasp and harness that emotion that you felt, that wonder that you felt at your first experiences with wargaming, both on the miniature side, the scenery side, and playing the game. Because those first war games that almost everybody played were with other people who knew about them, and you were sort of a guest, and you were being shown how the war game works. And you were discovering it, and you didn't know how it worked. And it was kind of wondrous because you were facing against a huge ranked mass of orcs, and you had your heavy heavy cavalry or whatever. Whatever unit you had. You had French Old Guard marching towards you, and you're just forming up. Whatever it was, you didn't know how the war game worked. You were just immersed in the experience. You were trying to imagine what you would do. How you would react if you were the cavalry getting ready to charge the orcs marching in, or whatever it was. You didn't know what dice rolls you needed. You didn't know how the mechanisms worked, and you had this wonder. It was absolute immersive wonderment. It was kind of like being. I imagine that's what it would be like. Or, when I remember this experience, I imagine that's what it would be like if adult me was able to be immersed in one of those full alternate reality experience, the headset experience. If the technology was really good, how you see on movies where the technology is really good and the people say, oh, it's like I was really there. Imagine that kind of experience. I mean, we can't have that now because the technology doesn't quite yet exist. But I'm saying that's how I felt. That's how I remember feeling when I was a little boy. And that's what I think the Little Wars event wanted to try and impart upon the Games Workshop staff it had invited to the event. Because what that does is it fills you with that childlike immersion and enthusiasm, which the Games Workshop wanted us to harness and take back to our stores, take back to our departments, so that we could just enthuse about wargaming and get a sense of how precious wargaming was to our childlike selves, because I think that's what it evokes. That memory evokes a childhood fascination with it, and I just think that was wonderful. It was a very good event for Games Workshop to run. I really praised them for running that event. I so enjoyed the event, but I can see why they might not want to do more because. I defected. I was gone then. It was historical all the way. And Games Workshop can be a little bit. I know Games Workshop wouldn't hold an event of that sort now, because of course, I mean they're a business. Of course, they don't want to promote their competitors, no matter how small and insignificant we are in comparison. If you're talking about other war games manufacturers and companies, generally, I mean, really, the vast majority of us don't even register as existing. On the Games Workshop scale, because they're a global corporation. So I can understand why they wouldn't do it again. But I think at that point they wanted to infuse staff. They really wanted it to be a staff-focused day. It was a great idea. Great idea.
Going back then to being a 12-year-old kid playing chainmail on your living room floor, how do you go from that point to actually working for Games Workshop? What was the story there?
I was working in the late 90s. I was working in a supermarket environment. I was being paid a lot of money. When I was 24, I was on 35 grand a year. That's 20 years ago nearly. But I was working 80 hours a week. I mean, I don't know what they're like at Tesco level. The company I worked for wasn't as big as that, but nowhere near. But my experience of working in supermarket management is that you work to death. And at some point, I just said, you know what? No, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm done. And I went and had an interview with Games Workshop. They offered me the job. It was for less than half the pay that I was on. They offered me less than half the pay, and I took it. I think so. And it was that opportunity. It's the reason that, especially in the retail sector, that staff go and join them now. I mean, why wouldn't you? If you're a war gamer, well, it would be a natural place to go, wouldn't it? And I suppose that lots of war gamers, when they're young, would love to work for Games Workshop. I think as you're older, obviously, there are different factors. But yeah, I was pretty young. I was different in that I was really well paid in my previous job, but I was overworked. And I just said, I'm done. I've had enough of it. And, sometimes money's, money's a tool, really. I'm not really a money enthusiast. I see it more as a tool. So it was a lifestyle choice. And you know what? I loved it. I really loved being a Games Workshop store manager. I've got a lot of stories. I got tons of stories about the good side of working for Games Workshop. I've got a ton of stories about the bad side of working for Games Workshop. There are those as well. But I had my 9 years there. I look back at it quite fondly. I think the last year or so was the only disappointing year. I mean, that led to why I decided to leave. But overall, it was a really positive experience.
So were you straight in as a manager then, a store manager?
Yeah. Straight. Well, it's because I came from I was a supermarket store manager, and I approached Games Workshop and I said, "Hey, I'd like to apply to be one of your retail managers." And they gave me an interview on that basis and said, "Okay." But I went through all the same stuff that like a retail store manager will go through now. So I went through the whole training thing, which was quite interesting and fun. And some of it was a lot of it was of a very high quality. There was some really high quality staff training at Games Workshop in retail.
How many staff did you have at the shop?
Well, that was I was a training store. One of your listeners, John Barber, was a trainee manager at my store, Cardiff. I joined initially, and I think I did my training in Newport, and then I was moved off to Swindon, and I stayed at Swindon store for just a wee while, and then Cardiff came up, and because I was previously living in South Wales. I thought, this is a great opportunity. It's a bigger store. It had a little pay rise attached to it. So of course I jumped to go and take that store, and it was really successful. It was a failing store at the time, and then I got in and we turned it around. There were some great staff there. Damien and Pokey were the two full-time staff, and they were magnificent, absolutely delight to work with. And then we would take on eventually, people would notice and come and see what we were doing and say, you're doing a really great job here. We want you to show the other trainee managers what you're doing. And I became a training store. And loads of trainee managers went through, and John Barber was one. And I had a great time with being a training store. I mean, partly because you got a staff member for free. So Cardiff was a big store and had 2 full-time staff members, and I think we had like 3 or 4 part-timers. And if you were a training store, you got a trainee manager as well for free. It didn't come out of your hours allocation. So of course you had to train them, but you also got them to do stuff as well, of course. And so it was, having a lot of staff in comparison to other stores was glorious, because I didn't have to do. I got to plan and train, which is what I like to do. It meant also that I had a great store, because most of the trainee managers were good. I mean, John was especially good. John was he was excellent and there was Dan as well. There were a few that were really, really good. And a lot of really great people as well. Some of the part-timers that came through and went on to do different and great things. Some of them went on through Games Workshop. The trainees, obviously went on to become managers. Some of the part-time staff also went on to go and apply for jobs with, in different departments in Games Workshop. It was really fun. We had quite a lot of people, but we always had a core of. It was always the core of 3 of us, me and my 2 full-time staff, Damien and Pokey, and actually, to be fair, Mike Weatherhead, who was one of the key part-timers. And Mike Weatherhead was probably the most important part-timer I've ever worked with, because he was a tea fanatic as well. And so I didn't even have to ask. Just when my teacup was empty, Mike would be off and another one would be there within about 2 minutes. Glorious.
What did a typical day look like then, from getting in the morning to how the day unfolded, and could you talk us through that?
Well, in Games Workshop stores, I wonder if they're the same now, because it's actually a delight running a Games Workshop store, because see, if you juxtapose running a Games Workshop store with running your own gaming store, so an independent one, it's completely different. The Games Workshop managers, they can concentrate on planning and training. That's all they have to do. They don't have to worry about money at all. Of course, they have financial targets and all that sort of stuff. But they don't have to worry about things like having stock. They don't have to worry about paying the rent. They don't have to worry about the electricity supplier or demands from the landlord. They don't have to worry about any of that. All they have to worry about is making sure that their staff are running intro games and making sure that they've got like half-term gaming planned, or whatever they do now. I don't know. Do they still have games nights? When was the last time you were in a Games Workshop store?
A couple of years ago. I don't play or buy the new stuff, so I've no real reason to go in.
I think it must be 20 for me. I've 20 years since I've been in one.
Yeah,
must be. I left Games Workshop 20 years ago, and I don't think I've been in. I think I've been in one once in 20 years. So I don't know what they do now. I don't know if they hold all those events. I don't know what the training's like in Games Workshop now. But we do a lot of training, and we do a lot of painting as well, and terrain making. That was great. That was another. See, one of the best things about being in Cardiff is because the head office is in Nottingham, and Cardiff's like 3 hours away, so nobody ever came. And plus, there was the bridge toll. There was a massive bridge toll at the time. Nobody ever came to Cardiff. It was so rare that they'd come. So we kind of got left on our own. And we could mess around a bit. So we did a lot of terrain making. Like for Games Day, there was one Games Day where I helped the area manager. It was a few of us. It was like me, the area manager, and another guy. And we'd meet at the Newport store, because the Newport store had a big basement where you could do loads of terrain making. And we built this great giant Imperial Guard tank factory. I mean, it was about 5 foot tall. It was probably 10 foot long, 3 foot wide. It was absolutely enormous. It was ridiculous. It was for Games Day. And that's the kind of thing you got to get up to when you're remote, when you're successful, when you're like a training manager. So yeah, it was loads of fun as well. I mean, I can't really fault much to do with Games Workshop retail. It was an extraordinary experience.
John tells me you got at least, was it an army or two armies, a couple of armies in White Dwarf? Was that related to that Games Day project, or was that something else?
Oh, I think it's sometimes it's just like, sometimes people will come to your store and they'll be from head office and they'll say, "Oh, that's nice," or you'll know somebody at head office, or they'll put a call out for things or does anybody have this sort of painted army? And on one was a tournament. I'd been to a tournament at Games Workshop HQ. I think it was a staff tournament. And I think that was an Imperial Guard army, and it had loads of converted tanks. It had about like 30 vehicles in it. All the squads had their own Chimera transports, and they were all customized because, like, I was a historical wargamer as well, and Imperial Guard are obviously the best army for historical wargamers within the science fiction area because it's got tanks, and they all look like real tanks. And so I had a massive Imperial Guard army that appeared in there, and I think the other one was a Dark Elf army. It was just beautifully painted. It was painted in a nice, simple color scheme, slightly different color scheme, but it was just really dark and quite beautiful and dark. And I can't quite remember. I think the Dark Elf army, actually, I think that one went in a Warhammer rulebook.
Have you still got pictures of them? Have you still got the armies?
I've still got one of the armies. I've still got the Dark Elf army. Yes. Yeah, so if anybody sees a Dark Elf army from a very 20 years ago or more Warhammer edition and wants to buy it, give me a call. I probably still got it somewhere.
What happened to the other army?
Sold it. Sold it in bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. I just had a period. So I left Games Workshop in 2004, I think it was. 2004, 2005. And I went to one interview to go for a job. And I hated the interview. I hated the sound of the job. And I sat in my car afterwards and I said to myself, "No, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do this." I've been playing with toy soldiers for 9 years and kind of, I mean, we worked hard. And when I was in trade, we made Games Workshop a lot of money. We were really good in Games Workshop trade sales. We turned it around. There was a group of us that turned it around. And so we were serious and hardworking. But I thought at that time, do you know what? I've been able to be around toy soldiers for 9 years and be really successful at it as well. So no, I'm not going to get a job. I'm going to continue doing this. This is what I want to do. And I had a talk to a fellow he was an ex-employee at that time from UK trade sales, and he was he was leaving work as well. And we just said, you know what? Let's do some toy soldier stuff. We'll do it. We can do it. And so we did.
I take it that leads into the birth of Great Escape.
Wow, that seems like a natural segue.
I have a few more things to pick up on just before we move on, if that's okay. Yes. One of the things was, it comes up a lot, when folk talk about going into Games Workshop back in the day, the enthusiasm of staff. Some folk loved it, some folk found it a bit overpowering. How do you kind of walk that tightrope to make sure that you're being really welcoming and enthusiastic, but also not to the point where you're kind of suffocating folk?
I was on the side of the not. I'm an introvert, and I think Games Workshop, the Games Workshop model, really suits extroverted people, because the whole introducing people to wargaming thing, the Games Workshop way of doing that is to be very enthusiastic, and you need people who are able to do that naturally. I can't. I'm not very good at that. It's not one of my skills. And I also appreciated that there are people like me who don't want to be enthused at. Maybe there are people that are a little more technical and they're interested in the technical aspect of it. There are people that are attracted to it for different reasons. And that's why the Games Workshop default, if you want to package it up and give people an off-the-shelf, follow this method and you'll be successful, I think their way is clever. The Enthuse way is clever, but it's not me, and it wasn't my store at the time. And I think that's why, because the Cardiff store was like mega successful. But I think that's because we could strike a balance. There are some times where you need to enthuse and be like that. So I'd deploy the staff member who was there for that. There were other times where you needed a different approach. So I'd deploy this person, or, and there's other times there would be things that I was particularly good at. There would be a customer base that I would be particularly skilled at. It was about harnessing the skills of the people that you worked with, and aiming conversations and interactions at an appropriate level with the customer. That was always one of Games Workshop's key ideas, was that you always make the conversation appropriate to the customer. But sometimes there was the default enthuse. It was always the default enthuse. And I think, that would rub me up the wrong way now, 20 years ago, whenever. And I know that it rubs people up the wrong way. We didn't do it. We were smarter than that. And I think the smart stores, the stores that are that know that lesson, I think they're probably really cool. And I think, we could walk in there and they wouldn't go, "Hey, which army are you collecting today?" Then that sort of irritating approach.
Yeah, taking stuff out your hands and putting other stuff in. No, you don't need that. You need this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just one final thing in the World of Games Workshop. Did you win the World Warhammer Championship in '99?
Yeah, it was a staff one. It wasn't it's not like an open competition. It was a staff competition. They were holding, I don't know how long they did it for. I went to 2 or 3 of them. And they were great because they would get staff from all over the world. So you'd play people from Games Workshop departments around the world. It was wild. And I beat, oh man, do you know what? I've forgotten his name. The guy I beat went to work for Battlefront Miniatures, Flames of War. His name escapes me. I do apologize in advance for your name escaping me. That's because I'm rubbish with names. It's nothing to do with the gentleman I was playing. He was playing a Lizardman army and I was playing Vampire Counts. It's a Vampire Counts army. That Vampire Counts army was cool because, and I've still got that one, because it had a lot of zombies in it. And I used there was a range of Citadel. Citadel did an early range of zombies. I think it was, I can't remember the sculptor. Somebody help me out here. Jez Goodwin, I think it may have been. I think Jez Goodwin was the sculptor. It was a range of zombies, a lot of sculpts, and they're just so good. They're really good sculpts. They're good now. And I think the one that I remember the most is a zombie shuffling across with a crow on his shoulder, pecking at his brain. They were just lovely models, and I played with that army and won every game. And for it, I won a giant dwarven warhammer, a full-size dwarven warhammer, which I've still got. I still got that thing as well. Yeah, that was ace. So Games Workshop did some really cool stuff for the staff as well. And I don't think they were probably not as monstrous. I mean, again, they've done some bad things. They weren't as monstrous as I think as well. My experience. That's my experience of them. My experience of them is that they gave me a good opportunity. I worked my guts out for them. I got to a pretty good position in the company. And yeah, you know what? I could let my last year there sour my 9-year experience, but I don't think it would be fair. I don't think it would be fair to myself to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a good experience.
As we transition then, just final on that, what went wrong, if you don't mind talking about it?
They brought people from Boots in.
Right.
Yeah, that's what went
wrong. The chemist?
Yeah.
Really?
They brought in a new managing director from Boots, and he brought in his own people. He was a disaster for the company, and the people he brought in were a disaster.
Hemorrhoid cream up on the racks and everything like that.
It was they just, I don't know why they were brought in. I don't know why. It was just they were I think that Games Workshop was maybe, I don't know if it's worked since. I mean, I may have been proved wrong since, but I can just tell you my experience. It's that they wanted to corporatize Games Workshop too quickly. I think maybe if they've done that now, then they've maybe taken the right amount of time to do that. I don't know what they've done now. I'm not particularly interested in them now.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I think they just went on this mad dash to corporatize. And I think maybe Lord of the Rings was part of it. I don't know what role that played. I can't quite remember. I think Mark Wells came in just before Lord of the Rings. But his leadership was terrible. He didn't. I hesitate to say he didn't understand the culture, because I don't think that's particularly valid. I think maybe he just tried to employ a strategy with a workforce that didn't believe in his strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't convince us of his strategy. And so it turned out to be, it turned bad. And yeah, I could say a lot more about the culture of Games Workshop, and a culture that I know still permeates through Games Workshop at the head office level. But I mean, I don't want to sully my experience with anything that might sound bitter, because I wasn't bitter about it. I mean, I felt that it was the time for me to leave. I think that maybe I think it's a corporate structure, and Games Workshop is a corporation. Let's not try to fool ourselves that it doesn't value the profit line above everything else, because it does, because it's a corporation. That's what corporations do. And I don't think I felt that I didn't fit in to that corporate structure, because I got to a position where the next position that I took would mean that I was sort of fully integrated with a corporate structure, and it doesn't fit me. I just don't fit that kind of thing. I'm a good middle level manager. I'm a good sort of project manager, middle level manager type person within a corporate structure, higher than any, even moving sideways from that, it's time for me to go. And I realize that. I realize that now. I didn't quite grasp at the time. I was a little bit annoyed at the time, but I understand that now. And so I think it's fair to say that I learned plenty from Games Workshop, and then within a year, we'd launched a new company 19 years ago, and that company's still here. So I like to think that what I learned from Games Workshop, plus who I am myself and who I work with, and who I work in partnership with, I think that's been a really good. I mean, it's worked all right for me. I can't complain about that.
So talk to us about the early days of Great Escape Games. What was the original vision, and how has that kind of developed over the years?
Oh, okay. Well, that has developed over the years. The first few years were a struggle. It's really tough. It's a tough business. It was an especially tough business in the mid 2000s. We started in 2005, and we really launched product. We really launched in 2006 when we had product, and then of course the world economic system collapsed, and we struggled through that as well. It's not easy being a nascent company in a worldwide recession, but we did. We made it through, and I think we actually did a couple of really good early things. We've got our first rule set was called Rules of Engagement, and it was for World War II. And I know there's a lot of people still playing it. We sold a few thousand copies, and that was really gratifying to have a rule set, because that was our strategy. Our strategy was to develop these World War II rules and really be rules developers. It's somewhat evolved from that. But that was the early stage. So we started with a one rule book and a small range of miniatures, which we shared. We produced and licensed with a company called Bolt Action. We'd been fans of Bolt Action and been painting them, buying their miniatures for years, and got to know them. A couple of lovely guys. One of them still very active as a sculptor. And in those early days, we dealt with them, and we basically got their miniatures produced on license, and we sold them as Rules of Engagement platoons. We still sell those size platoons, the sort of 2 squads with a command group. So all of our platoon box sets in the Great Escape Game stores are that sort of format, 2 squads with a command group. That's from the early days. And that went okay. That was okay. That was like making us a meager living. And we moved on and did some other stuff. But eventually we came to a sort of a conversation, a series of conversations I had with my fellow director and co-owner Mark Wheatley. We were just talking about gaming and the sort of gaming that we did and the sort of gaming that we could do as Great Escape Games that would branch out from World War II. And so we naturally looked at gaming. I mean, we'd already looked at Ancients gaming, which is my true love, my first true love, I should say. My first true love is Ancients gaming. We'd done a lot with that and done really well with the rule set. But what Mark was proposing was to do something with miniatures, and specifically to have it as a range of miniatures that was the game, and it came through watching movies. And it was Western movies, and we're both Western fans. Mark's a movie fanatic. I grew up I'm from Canada, so Westerns are part of the, obviously part of the culture, and we were just watching movies. There was that really good resurgence, remember, in the late 90s. I think it's early to late 90s of Hollywood Westerns. Some great movies, and extended into the 2000s. And we watched one of those films, which I think at the time wasn't very old, called Open Range. Open Range, it's got Robert Duvall, Kevin Costner. The cast is great. Story's great. It's, classic Western territory. Have you seen Open Range?
No, I don't think so, no.
Well, that's homework for you. At least you've got to, everybody that's listening, just go on YouTube and put in something like Final Gunfight in Open Range. We watched that, and I turned to Mark and I said, I want to play that game. And that was the birth of Dead Man's Hand. He was trying to convince me at the time. He was saying, I think we should do the Old West. And I was like, ooh, yeah, that's interesting. We'd played some Old West stuff before. We both had a few cowboy characters painted up. And Games Workshop had their own. They did a cowboy version of their Lord of the Rings game. Warhammer Historical did. It's called Legends of the Old West. And we played a bit of that when we were at Games Workshop together. But watching Open Range, I was like, oh, you've got me. I'm in. I'm totally in. We need to do the Old West. And we started talking about what kind of game we'd want. And it was all based around watching movies. We'd just watch loads of movies. And I think of all the genres, I mean, obviously war movies are great. I mean, Westerns are not war movies. It's kind of a different thing. It's funny that all those Westerns, the reality of the Old West, although lawless, brutal, etc., isn't kind of romanticized. I use that word with qualification. When you're watching a Western, the gunfights are brutal. It's beautifully choreographed. The action's great. And in the real Old West, the gunfight at the OK Corral was the most famous battle, if you like, and it lasted 40 seconds. There's, in Westerns, there are far more gunfights than there were in reality, collectively. And again, with the caveat that it was a lawless place. It's a crazy history. But we just wanted that cinematic version of the Old West. And we were always, when we developed a game called Dead Man's Hand, which is it's what we're known for. It's what we do the best. We do Old West. We do other stuff as well, but we do Old West. That's what we do. And we just wanted it to be fun and cinematic. We didn't want it to be serious. We didn't want it to be, we didn't want it to be complicated, but we wanted it to be the kind of game that you discover as you play. So when you first play it, you think, okay, but then as you play it more, you start to discover its nuances. And the different ways that you can play, and it's all packaged. It's all done quite simply. So the core, the guts of the rules are only a few pages, like 10 pages, which covers everything. But it's those little nuances, and it's the little combinations that you can do. Like, do you duck back from this attack, or do you play this card at a certain time? You know, are you going to risk putting your best guy around there to shoot up the enemy, only to leave him exposed at the same time? So it's a wonderfully, really little simple system to learn, but it's kind of elegant in the different things you can do with it.
What scale is it?
Well, we do it all in 28 mil scale. Mm-hmm. So that kind of emphasizes that cinematic quality. So whenever I'm playing a game, I mean, you know, the iconic Western scene, it's a street. And I love the look of the streets in the Old West, the kind of claustrophobia and the muddy nature. It's funny that in North America now you see streets laid out like that, sometimes with the same sort of buildings. But I love the little bits of scatter on the street, the horses on the hitches, an empty wagon, barrels on the ground. It's that sort of, and that takes me back to that sort of Little Wars experience and the experience as a 12-year-old going and seeing that first Napoleonic game. It's kind of like you're being, I know it's not, but you're kind of immersed in the setting, and the setting is important. And we always wanted Dead Man's Hand to be like that, and wanted it to be really fun, and more Hollywood than serious. It's a great game. It's a really good game.
So is it?
I forgot what the question was. I'm sure there was a question.
No, just talking about Great Escape and the games that you've got. But yeah, the Dead Man's Hand game. If I was playing you, so would we have both our wee factions? How many guys each are we talking?
Yeah, so it's typically seven characters aside, and when Dead Man's Hand came out in 2013, and obviously one of the reasons I came on to talk to you was about the Kickstarter. That's the Kickstarter starts in October the 26th, and that's for Dead Man's Hand Redux, which is, if you like, the second edition of Dead Man's Hand, or more of an edition 1.5, because it's not really changed. There eventually, when we get round to the middle of next year, when we've released the rest of the factions, we'll have 30 different factions for the Old West. So there's a plethora of stuff to choose from, all of your sort of Old West tropes, and the types of gangs of ne'er-do-wells and other peoples that you might see. So we've got factions from your classic outlaws and lawmen up to pioneers, renegade Indians who are westernized, so they use the European equipment, the 7th Cavalry, even some of the Australian influence from. We've even got the Kelly Gang in their boilerplate armor, because again, it's cinema, it's cinematic. I don't want to hear that. Oh no, there is in Australia. It's cinematic. We're not taking this immensely seriously. So because we were really wanting to explore everything we could with the Old West, because we love westerns, and we love the setting, and we love the kind of things that we can do and create, and the idea of creating, just exploring different types of people. I think the Hollywood version of the Old West is an interesting cinematic version, but also the history of the Old West. I spent quite a bit of last year reading a lot of books about the destruction of the last of the Native American tribes, the destruction really of their culture, their independence, ultimately the destruction of a civilization. and so there's the very serious things, because the very serious aspects to that genre. That's one of the things that's always encapsulated my passion for historical wargaming, because it's such an easy vehicle to learn history. I've got a personal passion for social history, and wargaming really allows and facilitates that. You can look into the military history of particular conflicts, but that inevitably leads to the social history and the history of nations, the history of our civilization, the history of our entire world. And I can kind of do that. That's what is beautiful about the work I do now in Great Escape Games, because I can do that as part of my professional life. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I have to work. I work really hard. I have to do my taxes. I have to make sure the payroll goes through. I have to order stuff, all of that sort of stuff. But at the core of what I get to do, and I'm really lucky to do, is I get to contemplate these genres, these parts of the world, these histories, and I also get to indulge my personal passion for them. It's a very lucky position to be in, but it's because people like what we do, and I really appreciate that.
What's the plan with the Kickstarter now then?
Well, we've had this. We had this edition of the first edition of Dead Man's Hand was out for 10 years. It's gone through 8 print runs, and I think with all the feedback that we got, we knew we could polish a gem. It's already a gem. Now it's going to be a highly polished gem. So we've improved existing aspects of the rules. Fundamentally, nothing changes. A few of the cards in the game change to make them more in balance with the rest of the card deck. We've got some extra rules that we kind of maybe weren't complete with in the first edition. Stuff with like stagecoaches, civilians, and we've added a really fast campaign system, a kind of fast campaign system that you can pick up as a tournament. You can easily run as a tournament or an event, a sort of narrative event, or that kind of gaming club type of narrative event as well, where you can play it over a few evenings. And what we really wanted to do is, because this is a really good game. I really like it, and we wanted to make sure it was more accessible. And one of the issues with everything I've been talking about, if there's been a common thread that goes through it, it's this visual aspect of wargaming. And I love the idea. Obviously, in the Old West, it's the iconic town, and we wanted to give that. We wanted to be able to provide that for a much wider wargaming audience. We've worked with Foreground, and we continue to work with their parent company in producing really good quality pre-painted MDF buildings. But the truth is, you can't produce them on a large enough scale to be able to do what we wanted to do with it, because we want to say to people like your listeners, come and play this, and we want to give them a box where they can put together their town out of plastic components in the box, and then put together all their figures out of plastic components. So at the heart of the Kickstarter campaign is the Dead Man's Hand box set, which contains plastic buildings, plastic figures, plastic scenery items, your rules. It's a proper, dare I say, grown-up wargaming company product. And probably, I hope it marks really, I hope we're presenting you with a product which is really intriguing and exciting, because we've spent a lot of time, put a lot of resource and work into it. We know that people like playing it because we've been doing that for 10 years. And we think more people should know about it. And then, because I want to make more plastic buildings, and I want to make loads more plastic soldiers. We've done 3 sets of plastic figures already. We're doing now the plastic buildings. We're planning more plastic figures next year. And I think the Old West just is a really exciting place to wargame, especially because you can just do it as it's not a huge investment in your skirmish wargaming is. I think I need skirmish wargaming as well as the kind of wargaming where you have to paint 200 soldiers. I think you need a balance of it. And I love to be able to concentrate. It's like a different type of painting, isn't it? So you've got a different, because when you're painting 40 French Napoleonic line infantry or a unit of 30 high elves, there's a different approach to when you're painting one character. Because I treat my Dead Man's Hand characters as painting individual characters, and they've got names and they've got a life. So there's that aspect to it, and I love the idea of creating. I love the idea of that's the creation of that sort of setting and scenery to be very accessible and simple. And I hope loads of people will look and just have a look at what we're doing, because this is, wargaming has to be about accessibility as well. It has to be something that attracts more and more people, because like you, I would like more and more opponents in my wargaming. I'd like young people being brought in. I'd like people from board gaming and other hobbies to be attracted by wargaming. And we've realized as a company that plastic products are very accessible and preferred by a wider wargaming public. They're just, I'm kind of a little bit old-fashioned in that I've always preferred my metal models. But, truthfully, the majority of the public out there prefer the wargaming public, prefer plastic models. And the only way that you can make available to people Western towns is in plastic. It's just the truth. You can't produce it in MDF or in resin or in any other medium in the way that you can with the machine tooled injected plastic molds. And so we believe in it. We believe in the Old West as a genre that people should be playing, so much that we've invested in the molding for buildings, which I don't know of outside Games Workshop. Can you think of a company outside Games Workshop that's invested in? Certainly not in the historical market. They haven't, but it's just a really exciting project.
So as we approach the end of our chat, then Stuart, where can the listener go to find out more about Dead Man's Hand and Great Escape Games and the Kickstarter and all that good stuff?
I think greatescapegames.co.uk has to be your first port of call. We are also on all of the social media things. Facebook is probably the most active. I can't remember the names of the other ones. What are they called? Twitter? Is it still called Twitter?
You're asking the wrong person. I'm not on any social media. It must change it to X, like I believe.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? We're on X. But yeah, if you just go to greatescapegames.co.uk, and actually, if you're at any of the war game shows, we do a few of those every year. We go to, our next one is Recon in Leeds, and then we're at Warfare in Farnborough in November. We're obviously very approachable. But yeah, you can get us through the website, get us on the Facebook page, ask us questions. But go and have a look, because the Kickstarter campaign goes live on the 26th of October. I think if you search Dead Man's Hand Redux on Kickstarter, you can find the preview page, or you can get it through our website. And that runs for a couple of weeks. And we're going to have these shiny, gigantic new lovely box sets out and on your tabletops by April next year. April next year is the release date for Dead Man's Hand Redux.
Thanks very much for listening to this episode of the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. If you enjoy the show, then please do share it with someone else you think might enjoy it too. And be sure to check out our Discord community of like-minded hobbyists, which you could find at bedroombattlefields.com/Discord. It'd be great to see you in there.